This is Ellen Max, Stuck in the Upside Down, Episode 8. We will be discussing Stranger Things Season 1, Episode 6, Chapter 6, The Monster. This episode brings several storylines together. The characters are starting to get closer to the truth. Will they find Will? Will they go into the Upside Down? And who will face the monster?
So some great things about this episode is a lot of the 80s nostalgia that they have. That this is actually one of my favorite parts because I remember so many of just some of those, we'll call them, I guess, like Easter eggs, right, in the show. So one of them would be, and I had one of these, the ballerina music box in Nancy's room. So in one part of the episode, they do show that, and you open it and she spins around. Like I had one of those. And then Jaws poster in Will's room. So I watched that movie Jaws, love Jaws. I think it's funny because their 50th anniversary, I think it was 50th, was I think last year. And the town I live in had a big like Jaws party. They did like they played the movie and it had like all kinds of snacks and stuff. It was really cool. So a few more
Nice.
things that they put in this show episode. Jeez, what is wrong with me? You're talking about movies. The large Christmas light bulbs. Do you remember those, Elle?
Yes, so old school, but I felt like they were so much more effective than like the tiny ones we have now.
Yeah, I feel like they look really pretty too because it just lights up so much better. Another oldie but goodie is the payphone that Hopper uses. I don't know about you, Elle, but I used to, it was like a nickel, I think, for the payphone. So I would like put a nickel in the payphone and then you'd get like a minute or something or 2 minutes. And I would call like my mom or dad. And as soon as they answer, I'd be like, come pick me up at the mall. And then I'd like hang up before my nickel ran out.
Yeah, I remember those. I can't think of the last time I've seen a payphone.
Yeah, I was just trying to think like I can't remember the last time I seen one either. And then it's funny because I was talking about this recently. Another like um Easter egg in the episode was the Aunt Jemima syrup. And like I feel like they just got rid of that. Like, oh, they still have it, but it's not the same bottle. They got rid of like the bottle that looked like Aunt Jemima. So
Oh,
that
because
was
it's racist?
yeah. So that was kind of cool to see in the episode. I missed the Aunt Jemima bottle. And then like some of the house decor, like fashion. So like the wallpaper, the like dreary colored carpets, the old patterned furniture, like definitely it's funny. Like I feel like when you watch shows and stuff, you can immediately tell if it was from the 80s because of like their house decor and especially the wallpaper. I remember going to like the wallpaper store and looking at all the different wallpapers with my dad.
God awful. Like, what were our parents thinking?
And like it's so much work to put up too. You gotta like do the glue and then like line it up right. And yeah, just I'd rather just slap some paint on there.
Yeah, definitely.
The corduroy jackets, which that's funny because I feel like some of the 80s fashion has come back, like jelly shoes, and I'm trying to think like anything else, but corduroy jackets really haven't made a comeback yet.
Well, I just think like the essence of a corduroy jacket is not just fashionable, but like practical because it was like warm inside, and it had like a thicker material. And even like if it was just like a plain color, like it changed like the perception of the color because of like all the ridges and stuff. So I love the corduroy jackets. I think all of the characters in this show that wear them look really good in them.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a picture of me a couple pictures of me as a child, like growing up in the 80s, and the big thing was the corduroy overalls
Yep,
for
yep.
the girls, and they came in, like you said, different colors. So, like, one picture I'd have like pink, the next picture I'd have red, and those were a big thing back then too.
Yeah, it's definitely like a warmer material, so I can kind of see like why it wouldn't be as popular now. But they've kind of like phased out jean overalls and stuff, and jean jackets too. Which I remember, you were cool if you had a jean jacket.
Yes. Yep, leather jackets were a thing for a while too, I feel like.
Yeah, like those greasers in the movie Grease.
Yes, that's right. A couple other, references in this episode were the ugly clown mobile that they showed in Jane's baby room. Again, like, I feel like a lot of the 80s decor, baby decor was, like, creepy. A
Yeah.
lot of clowns, Holly Hobby. Holly Hobby was, like, a thing. I actually had Holly Hobby, wallpaper,
Oh my
speaking of
god,
wallpaper. So ugly, and it was yellow, like, why they had to pick yellow, I don't know.
that's so crazy.
And then just lastly, the army surplus store. You don't see those around anymore.
Definitely not around here. I kind of feel like if you come by one, it's like, one in maybe like every 7 states or something. Like maybe like the northern states or the very south states, maybe. But yeah, I remember seeing that in the show, and I remember the interaction they had with like the cashier guy. He's like, "What are you guys doing with all this stuff?" And she's like, "Hunting monsters."
So dramatic too, like, I love it.
Yeah, Nancy. Yeah, in episode 5, Nancy ended up escaping the upside down during that very brief period of going inside the tree. But she's now like having flashbacks. You can see like some of the memories are kind of opening her mind as to what the upside down really is and what a monster really looks like. She's describing like the upside down as a decaying version of Hawkins. Um, and her and Jonathan, start to get closer. I don't even know if I'd say it's a boyfriend girlfriend way, but because they're both kind of experiencing the same type of fear and drive to like go save Will and her friend. Again, they went into the army surplus store and bought all that stuff because they're trying to figure out what type of weapons they can use to fight the monster and kill it for good. I think they like come up with a plan. They're trying to find a way to actually lure it out. Because it seems to be feeding on like blood. Um, I kind of get annoyed because I really like Steve's character as a whole, but him in this first season, he's just a jerk. Like he
Yeah.
doesn't deserve Nancy. He's just an asshole, and I kind of feel like he's interrupting what the bigger thing is that they're trying to accomplish here. Um, and I kind of think it's dumb that Jonathan got arrested for the fight that they had. And I think that it's very eye-opening. I don't know, is Nancy like 16 during this time? But she seems like a lot more mature. She's basically running around town, like buying weapons and determined to find her friend Barb that the police really aren't paying attention to. Um, I remember she like escaped her room and snuck Jonathan in there where he slept over. Like, I don't know. I just feel like she's showing her maturity right now. And I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think it's funny how many even shows that are on now have, like, people sneaking in the windows. Like, I don't ever remember sneaking people in my window. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
like
just feel like it's on a lot of stuff.
your dad is probably a lot like my dad, like scary. Like we wouldn't dare do that.
Yeah, yeah, you're right, you're right. I guess maybe the parents aren't scary enough.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, Nancy's dad's not very scary.
No.
And her mom was drinking in the bathtub, so she wasn't paying attention.
That's so funny.
So last episode, we talked a little bit about how Hopper was really starting to believe Joyce in that, the body with Will was fake. So he does his own research and he gets some details about the records the police used to say that the body was Will. He confronts the officer, and this officer eventually verifies that he was hired to say otherwise, to say that that it was Will and it really wasn't. So also he continues to do some more digging. He finds some newspaper clippings. After reading through the newspaper clippings, kind of, Hopper, as we can see throughout the season, he's very smart and he, is able to kind of connect the dots. And he finds out that there was a baby that had gone missing. Her name was Jane, and the baby was reported missing by a woman named Terry. So Hopper gets Joyce in, tells her what's going on, what he found out, and they decide to go visit Terry. So they find where Terry is. She lives with her sister. So they go there, hoping to be able to talk to Terry. They get there and they find out that Terry is in a vegetative mental state, really just unable to speak. They do talk to her sister. Her sister is her caretaker and lives with her. The sister does recall some stories about some doctors that said that, that Terry lost her baby in the third trimester. Terry was convinced that she had the baby and that these doctors took her baby named Jane. And again, this is where they go in and they show the bedroom that was created for Jane. And we learn that Jane is actually 11.
Yeah, it's really hard to like find these things out about Terry because I think that Joyce had her hopes up that Terry would be like the connection to help her find Will. But when they do get there, Terry's sister kind of gives them like the background. She says that um, Terry had those psychic abilities. She was also a patient of Dr. Brenner. Um, he didn't realize at the time that she was pregnant and they were doing all this testing on her. So during her time at Hawkins' lab, um, it turns out that she did have a baby and they did take the baby from her. And because she was convinced that she had the baby, she tried to take Jane back. And in an attempt to do that, she was ultimately caught and they had to silence her. And they silenced her by electroconvulsive or electroshock therapy, which essentially left her in a permanent catatonic state. And as we all saw in this episode, you know, there's nothing there. Or if it's there, there's no way to get that information out. Um, I've like I've heard of like the electroshock stuff. I remember learning about it like in college. I remember locally there was a hospital that did it, and I thought about how cool that is. Watching like shows and movies, I've seen cases, whether they were real cases or not, where it had to be that way, that they had to use this type of thing to help some of their patients. Um, and I believe they called it ECT, which I think is a little different, electroconvulsive therapy. Um, Obviously, they have to put the patient under. It has to be a doctor supervising. I believe that they use like some sort of drugs, like a muscle relaxant, to help calm the patient down before they send those volts through their head. Um, And I think it's just used for like severe cases where everything else they've tried isn't working. But like we see with Terry, I think that a lot of the latent effects of doing this type of procedure can cause memory loss, um, confusion, and even brain dysfunction, which I don't know. I'd probably have to look at case by case to have a better opinion about the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it. I do know this had to have been maybe 20 years ago now. I had applied for a position at a school for kids with behavioral issues, severe like behavioral issues, and they used electroshock. I don't know if it was electric shock or the ECT, but they used one of them. And I personally, just morally, I couldn't work there. I never tried. I just, as soon as they told me that, it wasn't something that, again, like, I don't know enough about it, but I just didn't feel like I had the capacity to be able to be in an environment like that.
Yeah, definitely. Again, I'm not like trying to judge things I really don't know anything about, but it just doesn't sit well with me.
It seems evasive, but again, like you just said, they are using it for severe disorders, but again, it just seemed evasive to me, especially at a school because they were teenagers, but still, I feel like they're. But again, not to judge, I don't know enough about it to really make like an educated
Yeah,
opinion on it. That's just my own experience.
agree.
So back in episode 5, Mr. Clark. Oh, so hold on, back up a little bit. So again, so Hopper's putting the pieces together, Joyce is with him. So while this is going on, um, Mr. Clark is approached by somebody from the Hawkins lab. But to go back a little bit, in episode 5, he was approached by a man from Hawkins lab who was posing to fix damaged radio equipment in his classroom. So basically, this is kind of letting us know that like Hawkins is getting close. They're kind of maybe putting the pieces together that 11 is somewhere in this school. So now in this episode 6, like I said, Mr. Clark's approached by a female scientist, Connie Frazier from Hawkins Labs, and she's pretending to be connected to an AV club program. So she, recognizes that the boys are in 11 are interested in this kind of thing, and they're trying to draw 11 out with Dustin, Lucas, and Mike using the new technology from these devices that they have at the AV club.
Yeah, and they're essentially using these devices to, what's the word? Not track, tap into their communicating. Um,
So yeah,
which
they're getting closer, we'll say, to trying to
to get
figure out where 11 is.
exactly and trying to figure out what they know, what the kids and everybody knows.
Yes.
Yeah, and meanwhile, back in episode 5, the fight between the boys and 11, from 11 trying to keep them away from the Upside Down in an effort to protect them, she does wander off into the woods because now she feels like they don't want me here. Now, where do I go? She starts having flashbacks of when she was at Hawkins' lab, and they were using her abilities to make connections with the Upside Down, with the Russian spies and all of that. And while she's having a flashback, she remembers that she has such an immense amount of fear, um, that she becomes violent, and that violent response kind of breaks open the gate to the Upside Down. And now she's remembering that she did that. Torn between 11 and Will, that's still missing, our heroic Mike is still really adamant that 11, even though she kind of threw Lucas around, was just trying to protect them from the evil in the Upside Down. And his instincts to know that, even though they don't know that for sure yet. I just love that about him. And then I love this conversation. These kids are young. Like, I don't think we realize these are 12-year-olds and they're having this conversation. And Justin says to Mike, the rule is you push first, you draw first blood, and you have to shake his hand. I like this so much because it's like it's conflict resolution. It forces them to do the right thing, to be a bigger person. And, Mike, Dustin basically brings Mike to Lucas's house to shake his hand. Mike's opinion of 11 at this point is that she is only trying to protect them. And both of them are starting to see 11 as a weapon that could basically help them find Will and fight off, the bad things that they are faced with. And my favorite part of this is when he says 11 is like a weapon, and without her is like R2-D2 fighting Darth Vader.
Yes, I love that. And we know that Elle, you're a big Star Wars fan, so
Yes, and R2 is my favorite, so
that's great. So again, Dustin brings Mike to Lucas's house so they can have a truce. Lucas resists. He doesn't want a truce with Mike because Mike refuses to leave 11. Again, he's seeing the benefit of having 11. And I feel like they have a connection. I feel like they had a connection from day one, which is really cool to see too. So Lucas decides to go out on his own and look for Will. So Dustin and Mike decide, all right, we're going to go search for Al. And again, like, really in this episode, we can kind of see how Mike's character is really starting to come into light. It shows like his loyalty. He's never going to give up to fight for the truth. And again, like we talked a little bit about, oh my God, I just lost it. But, the being a bigger person and conflict resolution. Sorry, that's what I was looking for. You mentioned conflict resolution, Elle. So like, I wonder if kids in real life acted like the kids in this show, what that would kind of look like for us now. Because even when Lucas didn't accept Mike's handshake, he still walks away. He was upset. He was angry. But instead of acting out with violence or, even like being mean, he just, he walked away. Lucas soon discovers his true north and he sets out to look for Will on his own. And that's when he stumbles on Hawking's labs.
Yeah, I think that having that discussion about conflict resolution, being the bigger person, even though at that age, they're trying to figure out who they are, what kind of person they want to be. They're learning to trust each other, knowing who not to trust. And in a lot of ways, us as parents, even now, we're constantly trying to find a way to shape our kids to grow up and be grown-ups and have those attributes, and expect that if they are in difficult situations like these, that they would act the same way. And I think that to look back at this episode and to look back into the 80s, that I didn't really see that came from their parents. I just kind of saw that as the environment that they all grew up in. And that's awesome. And even like the whole Dungeons and Dragons theme, and Dustin references it all the time. I forget one of the things he's like the blood drawn something. I forget. Or what happens when the ogres fight, or what happens when we fight, we get trapped by the ogres or something like that. So I just think that that's really inspiring. And even though I know my kids don't play Dungeons and Dragons and don't always think that way, I think it's an inspiring way to think that kids can think like that and act appropriately, even more so at such a young age.
And I think after hearing you say that, I wonder if some of that is like too much parenting, right? Because I feel like back then we were left a lot on our own and to figure out things on your own. So you almost kind of had to figure out conflict resolution or you wouldn't have any friends because there's going to be conflicts. They're going to happen. It's going to happen in friend groups. So we didn't have parents intervening and, going to the other kids' parents or going to the school or going here or going there. Like we kind of dealt with it on our own. And I feel like that kind of helped us create and, build those conflict resolution skills that we have. I feel like kids maybe lack that now because parents tend to intervene and kind of take over and they're not left to learn those, if that makes any sense.
I mean, honestly, that makes perfect sense. And it's such a bright perspective because, I don't think I've ever tried to overparent, but I try to overprotect. And I think that may be the reason why parents are overparenting because the world that we live in now is so drastically more dangerous, or
Yeah.
we're so much more aware of it now. Um, but yeah, you're right. You know, our parents didn't wonder, you know, where we were or when we were coming home. They just assumed that we were out riding our bikes with our friends and we'd be home for dinner. So it definitely, for me, it's like a different time. But yeah, I mean, that does give me a different outlook on the way I'm parenting, especially at this vital teenage age.
And I think you're right. Like it is a different time. Like I feel like even, I think back to when I was a kid and I would have a fight with a friend and I would, go talk to my mom about it and she'd be like, "Oh, just figure it out. You guys will figure it out."
Yeah.
Where now it's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And not that I'm saying it, I don't want to, before I say it, I don't want to say it as that I think it's a bad thing because I'm very, I'm very big on mental health and all of those things, right? And people's feelings and being considerate. But it's just a different conversation these days. Now it's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you're feeling that way. Like, tell me what happened. And I wonder if you do this and if you do that." And it's a lot of again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just different.
Yeah, and maybe that does have a lot to do with what happens when those kids grow up that weren't parented enough. What
Yeah.
happens to them when they become adults? Were they the serial killers that we now know too much about? Were those the serial rapists that we now know too much about? Were those the abusive husbands? Were those the wives that couldn't muster up the strength to leave their husbands in those very volatile situations? And maybe one has nothing to do with the other, but I'm just trying to think historically where we were then to where we are now and what type of people are in this world.
Yeah. Definitely something to think about more.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I do love finding out different interesting facts about Stranger Things in each episode. And when Lucas goes out on his own and finds his true north and sees the relationship between those vans that are driving through the neighborhoods and sees them at the Hawkins lab. Um, I did find out that the exterior of Hawkins National Laboratory was filmed, and most of Stranger Things were filmed in Georgia, but it was filmed at the former Georgia Mental Health Institute, which now is actually Emory University. And it's their Briarcliff campus, which I believe is like an administrative building, but they do research there, like in present day.
Wow.
Yeah, and for most of this season, most of the scenes were filmed in different parts of Georgia. In Jackson, Georgia, we see most of downtown Hawkins, the town square, the public library, and most of like those side streets. The Patrick Henry High School, which is located in Stockbridge, Georgia, which actually serves grades 9 through 12. That is actually used to film Hawkins Middle and High School together, although we see them in middle school, then we see them in high school um, in season 4 and 5. And East Point, Georgia is actually the location for where the Wheeler family lives. In most of like the surrounding neighborhood surrounding that house. In Fayetteville, Georgia is where they featured scenes like around Hawkins where they were like driving through and kind of like nearby areas, but they don't specify like a connecting town. Um,
Hmm.
and then Douglasville, Georgia, where it's actually a very popular place where they film a lot of other movies and shows. For instance, Walking Dead was filmed there, The Hunger Games, the movie Remember the Titans. And for Stranger Things, they use that area for like the forest and the quarry scenes, um, which is really cool because whenever I'm like watching a movie or show, I'm like, oh, I wonder where that is. And I'm trying to think in my brain and like, have I seen that before? Like in my own travels or whatnot. So it's really cool to know this. And then I did find out that in Augusta, Georgia, which is also where parts of Stranger Things is filmed, is actually where the Masters golf tournament is held. And it's been held there since 1934, the same place for a men's tournament for, what is that, 90 years? That's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I think we may need to take a trip to Georgia and do some sightseeing.
Yeah, definitely.
It
For
would be cool,
sure.
like, even though, they're not obviously not from the 80s, but it'd be cool to kind of see the town square and the library and the school. Like, I feel like that'd be really cool. Try to find the Wheeler house.
Yeah, I would love to do that. That's very cool.
So thank you. That was awesome information. And that's really cool about the lab too. I love that. It's again, I'd love to just see that, even from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like not like what I would think that like a major hospital lab would look like. It's very dreary and dark.
Yes, definitely. So back to episode 6, we see Mike, and we again, like, we're talking about like his growth a little bit. So how far will Mike go to save Dustin from some bullies? So Troy pulls out a switchblade knife and holds it against Dustin's neck and tells Mike to jump off the quarry. So again, Mike is not willing to risk his friend's life, so he chooses to risk his own, and he does jump off the quarry. At that point, that's when 11 comes in and she rescues him. She uses her powers, and she saves him from, going off of the quarry. So seeing what her powers did to help Mike, Dustin kind of realizes what she's willing to sacrifice, and that Mike's right. She is on their team. So again, she flashes back to Hawking's lab. She has a flashback where her fear response to opening the gate to the upside down. They show that again.
Yeah, it seems that every time she uses her power, it kind of weakens her body and it causes her mind to retreat to a darker time. So I think we are starting to see what her powers are actually doing to her own self. Um, we do start to see those vans that we were talking about earlier around the neighborhoods. And I think that Dr. Brenner is finally on to where and who has 11. So they end up closing episode 5 with the kids going back to Mike's house, meaning 11, Mike, and Dustin going back to Mike's house through the basement door. And you can see that 11 is now getting a sense that they're honing in. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, honing in on her. Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the episodes that we have seen in episode sorry, some of the issues that we do see in episode 5 and 6 are kind of bringing to light some of the issues that we see and face in the real world. Sometimes they remind us of cases that we see in the news, issues with our own kids at home, realizing that this generation of kids is so different from kids in the 80s and how we grew up. I have noticed like changes in the behaviors, the attitudes, lack of consequences, lack of accountability. Um, we used to have the mindset where we respect adults and authority, and kids just question them. And I feel like a lot of the generational younger parents um, are kind of right there with these kids. They're not holding their kids accountable. They're making excuses for their behavior. That mentality, not my kid.
Yeah.
And even the situation where Troy is holding a knife to Justin's neck really kind of brings about this important case that everybody seems to be talking about in the news, and it's the case of Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf. I'm sure most of you know, and Max and I are just going to try to just state the case facts, not the social media facts, not the opinions of people, not the AI post or any of that stuff, just the case facts. And in this case, it was a fatal stabbing at a high school track meet in, it was actually at Frisco, Texas, and took place on April 2nd, 2025. And the verdict just came in. I think it was last week. And it was a guilty verdict for murder one with a 35-year sentence with a chance to, what's the word, Max? When they get out early,
Parole.
if they get paroled in 17 years. Sorry, losing my mind for a second.
That's okay.
Um, so basically, there was an argument that broke out. Carmelo Anthony was under the wrong team's tent during a track meet, and it was Austin's team tent, where he was occupied with his teammates.
So there was testimony that Carmelo Anthony may have been invited into the tent by another student, but evidence was conflicting, so that's not a fact. We're not sure. One defense witness testified that a Frisco Memorial athlete who knew Anthony called him over to the team tent and greeted him, suggesting that he would be invited to stay over there. So, however, several other students testified that Anthony was not supposed to be there and was repeatedly told to leave, with one witness saying that he was asked to leave around 15 times before the confrontation escalated.
Yes, and these are all according to the case files. Testimony that Carmelo was sitting in a chair under the wrong tent with his backpack on his lap, and he had his hands inside his backpack. After being repeatedly told that he didn't belong in the tent, while he was sitting in the chair, Austin was standing up. Austin, with his hands, pushed each side of his shoulder at the same time. It was reported by testimony, it was not forcefully and not violently, but Austin was standing and Carmelo was sitting. Carmelo reportedly had said, "Touch me and see what happens," while he was still seated. And according to a medical examiner, with significant force, took out a 3.5-inch blade and forcefully stabbed Austin in the chest. A lot of misconception or a lot of fake things stating that it was a cleat sharpener, but based on evidence and court documents, it was a 3.5-inch blade. So the argument continues, why did he bring this knife to a track meet? When police and ambulance arrive and they had body cameras on, Carmelo appeared to be crying hysterically. asking if Austin was going to be okay, and repeated, "I was protecting myself." Also said, "I told him not to touch me." Also stated after the officer reported over the radio, "I have the alleged in custody." Carmelo says, "I'm not the alleged, I did it."
Okay, so there was also some video footage that was entered into evidence, and that is it actually has been released to the public, but it's very blurry. But in the video, you do see Carmelo running away from the scene, and then you do see police detain him, and that's when the police, video cam that Elle just mentioned comes up, and they do capture his behavior and his conversation with the police until he is cuffed and placed into the car. So claiming he, again, like Elle said, claimed to the police that it was self-defense. And again, at trial, he also claimed that. However, the jury did say they disagreed for a few different reasons. One of them being that he used deadly force and it was not legally justified. Austin was unarmed. So again, that kind of goes to the next one, which is like no immediate threat since Austin was unarmed. So Anthony refused repeated requests from the other teammates to leave their tent. And again, the jury said that both were 17-year-olds. They've never been and never met before this altercation. And it only took the jury about less than 3 hours to come up with a verdict. And again, it was based on a lot of these things that they felt warranted that verdict for him.
Yeah, so based on those facts, my conclusion is this. I don't know what was going through Carmelo's head. I can kind of picture him going into a tent ignorantly, sitting down, even after being told by several teammates that you do not belong here, you need to leave, and having this kind of ignorant attitude, because I'm picturing, based on these facts, that he is sitting down on a chair under a tent that's not his team, being told repeatedly, "You need to leave, you do not belong here," and him saying, even before Austin allegedly put his hands on his shoulders and pushed them, "Touch me and watch what happens." My feeling is that he chose to bring a knife. He chose to sit down. He chose not to leave. He chose to put his hands in his backpack where the knife was. And then when he left, the video footage shows him running and then walking. And then as he was getting detained by the police, even though he was upset, he seemed to have no emotion until they started asking him the questions. So during the time where they were cuffing him and walking him to the car, he was just kind of saying, "I told him not to touch me. I'm not the alleged. I did it." So for me, I don't see that this is self-defense. I don't see that him stabbing, even if it didn't kill him, justified what Austin did to him. A lot of scrutiny and comments about racism and an unfair trial have been coming out. So I tried to pull out the facts regarding that. Carmelo's family did receive about $600,000, and Mike Howard was hired by Carmelo's family, not a public defender, has been stated in social media. Mike Howard is a seasoned criminal defense attorney. Most of his career has been focused on self-defense. He argued Anthony believed he was being unlawfully touched or threatened, and that he did react in fear. He did argue that Anthony was wrongfully removed or confronted. He claimed that the victim had no legal right to physically force him out. He tried to frame the encounter as a rapid escalation rather than an intent to kill. And this ultimately was the case that the defense presented to the jury.
Thank you, Elle. And yeah, I mean, I think I have to say I agree with the jury just based on the facts that were presented here. Leave out everything else. Just based on this, again, like my first question is, why do you even have a pocket knife with you at a track meet? That's not a situation where you would need to bring something like that. And again, I agree with the jury in the fact of like deadly force was not legally justified. I feel like the altercation was not to the level of violence that it need to be violence. So I agree with that. And I also agree with them mentioning that, Austin was unarmed and that there wasn't an immediate threat at that time. Could it have escalated and became an immediate threat? Yes. I do think that that's a possibility if the stabbing didn't happen and things had maybe gone differently and it became like a physical altercation and then, something happened, maybe. But based on what they found here with the evidence that was given, I agree that there was no imminent threat to him. So again, just to go back to some of the facts around the case and talking about the jury. So some are claiming that the jury selection was racist. None of the jurists were Black. Defense objected to the prosecutor using pre-emptory strikes to remove the prospective Black jurors, and they claimed it was for non-racial reasons, including the jurors' occupations. So Carmelo did file some court documents as he is now 18. He was 17 at the time of the crime. And he is appealing it and asking the judge to appoint him an attorney because he has no money. So again, like Elle just said, they did raise $600,000 with the fundraiser. It was I don't know if I'm gonna say it right, but Gives and Go fundraiser. And the funds were supposed to be used for legal defense, relocating Anthony's family because of reported threats, living expenses, transportation, therapy, security, and anything kind of related to the case. So again, he's now saying that he has no money, this 600's gone, but there's been no financial statements or anything released to provide evidence on if this money is still there, is it gone? If it is gone, what was it used for? So again, we're not really sure what's going on with that money.
Yeah, and based on things that I've read, they did not have to prove how the money was spent. They did not have to provide receipts or anything like that. And we're just hearing about these things within the news and social media and speculating. In the end, it was assumed that he only had a court appointed attorney, and um and that's why the case wasn't fair, because he couldn't afford a decent attorney. I believe I read somewhere that this attorney cost $200,000, and the parents did use some of that money to pay for this attorney. Don't quote me on that. And I do know that he is in the process of filing an appeal as an adult because he is now 19 or 18. I think he's 18 now. And the appeal is supposedly based on a few things. And honestly, I can kind of see some of it. But it's logistics. So the jury selection, this whole thing about racism, that there wasn't that many Black jurors on his case. Now, this has to do with jury selection, and both sides have the ability to select jurors or exclude them. So it was jury selection. The Black prospective jurors were improperly excluded. There were legal errors made by the court. I'm not really sure. They don't really specify what those errors were. Something about rulings on evidence or jury instructions and other procedural issues. I mean, that's very vague. I think that what Carmelo is trying to do is to excuse what he did, not to be accountable, and to try to get out of his 35-year sentence. So, without any physical evidence and only opinions, the judge was actually on camera and gave an interview and stated that for his opinion, Carmelo appears to be a good kid who made a bad choice. He does believe that the jury got it right, and his defense attorneys, his parents, and family stated that he never intended to hurt Austin and that he was in fear for his life. Based on reported records, not actual records, he was a straight A and honor student. And again, I don't believe that the public can know about his criminal record as a juvenile, but it was stated that there was no record reported and only one social media, negative social media post. And that was with Carmelo posing with a gun that looks like an assault rifle, but was never confirmed or investigated by police.
So I don't know. I guess for me, like, I agree with the judge, right? He kind of like, I think Carmelo can be a really good kid, could be a really good kid, right? Who made a bad choice. But at the end of the day, he took someone's life. And I guess again, my domestic violence advocacy, I guess, comes out in my opinions around this because I feel like there's women in jail right now for killing people that had, or a husband or a partner that had been abusing her over and over and over again for years, and she's in jail for murder. So she took a life to defend herself as well. I'm sure, I don't know anyone specific. I'm just saying in general. So I appreciate, like you said, the appeal. I feel like, anyone who was given a sentence like that is going to try to appeal it. That would just be, the thing to do.
Yeah, I know. I don't see how a judge is going to grant the appeal. That's just my opinion. And I have a little bit of a legal background, but not enough to say exactly what they will decide.
It'll be interesting. Definitely interesting to follow.
Yeah.
So, in an effort to try to find some helpful information, and we want to bring some awareness to, what comes when it comes to our kids' safety and getting some, again, like we want to stick to some facts. So, get some truth about law enforcement and relationships with important issues that our kids and especially our teenagers might face. So, we actually conducted a off the record interview with a local officer who's now a lieutenant. He has been serving in law enforcement for over 13 years, and he's about to become a parent himself. So, again, we didn't record this, but we're going to go ahead and share with you the conversations that we had with him and some of the questions that we asked.
Yeah, a really nice officer, someone who has grew up in the town that he serves, and was very open to answer our questions. And just because we are a show that is focusing on the issues and creating a safe space, having him on air, you know, we just need to keep it anonymous. But I promise you that we did interview him, and these are the questions we asked, and these are his answers. So I will start. Advice that you can give to parents whose kids are being bullied or harassed online. Reporting is the best thing because bullying can down the road get really worse. Schoolmates, schools should be aware it can be criminal. Legal actions can be taken. Threats to harm, blackmail, extortion, stalking behavior, sexual undertones. In this state, we do criminalize bullying. Filing a report doesn't necessarily mean that police have to contact the other party. And 3 incidents will warrant a harassment order. And those incidents don't have to be 3 separate times. They can be 3 things within the same time, like
Mhm.
stalking, threatening, stealing, and that in our state will warrant a judge to grant a harassment order, which is essentially like a stay away order for a non-domestic situation.
And to kind of tie this into Stranger Things, the boys are often bullied at school and outside of school. They try to run and hide away from it, but as we can see, like that wasn't always the case as we talked about earlier with Troy. So we do also hear quietly comments about Will and not nice comments about him being gay. And even though he's missing or presumed dead during these episodes, we're still seeing that bullying piece of it behind his back, we'll say.
Yeah, and that kind of thing is not tolerated today. Next question. How is a missing child report handled today? Immediate reports are taken. There is no waiting period for children. Obtain name, age, description, last seen location, who they were with, what they were wearing. Are they endangered? An endangered child that's missing gets the highest priority. Are they a runaway with prior history? Missing, unclear circumstances, a rapid alert system, abduction, local emergency bulletins. Sometimes they go door to door. They go to the last location seen. Cameras, schools, hospitals, contacts. State police often gets involved. The FBI if a suspect crosses state lines. DCF if there is abuse or an unsafe environment. Back when it was really hard to handle missing persons or kids, there wasn't a DNA database or advanced testing. There were not any ways to electronically track your kids with apps. And law enforcement wasn't experienced or trained enough or even staffed enough to deal with every kid that supposedly went missing. And we do see that in this season of Stranger Things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that still seems to be an issue. So we did also ask him about like what to do if your kids are vaping or smoking weed. And he just said to educate yourself as a parent on different types of vapes, keep an eye on any changes in behavior in your children, being aware of like negative effects of the vapes and, possibly testing at home. There's also a tip line that parents can use to report marijuana vapes if they find out like who's selling them and where they're being sold. So we also asked what advice he would give to a single parent who might be struggling, or a single mom, will say, who's struggling to keep their kids in line, especially with some of the behavior issues that kids have, a temper, or history of breaking things and running away. He did recognize that there is a lack of resources to get mental and behavioral health, and just not to give up, and to just be reminded that the police can, de-escalate a situation and they'll try not to step in if they don't have to. And just to he didn't mention this, but just to add that some towns, depending on where you live, do have like a mobile crisis line that you can call, and they're trained on, mental health and behavioral health issues. And sometimes when you call, if you let the police know that it's a behavioral mental issue, they will send someone from that mobile crisis line as well.
So good to know, as we do point out, Joyce was the single mom in Stranger Things and does not seem to have those type of issues with her boys. But you can definitely see the struggle, with her insanity and trying to take care of her boys and relying on Jonathan and realizing that she's not a perfect parent. Um, going back to our topic of domestic violence, as it always seems to resonate with Max and I based on our experiences working with victims. We asked the officer, how far has police come with domestic violence, with victims? And his response is that he feels that they've come a long way. He sees that laws are always changing. They have trainings every year. They actually have police officers that work in a specialized department that primarily only work with domestic violence situations. And they do get sensitivity training more so now than they did before, and provide resources now for the victims. So if they get called to a situation and, I hate to always create this stigma around domestic violence situations, but if there's a woman there who's a mother and has a kid and literally has nowhere to go, now they can offer resources, to get them in a safe place until a case can be built up. Um, Another question we asked is, what should parents be doing better when it comes to keeping their kids safe? All we know right now is about like the tracking apps and trying to get to know the kids that they hang around with and trying to have conversations with their parents. But his advice is that having a conversation with the kid, letting them know that even though they're walking out the door and you can't specifically see where they are and who they're with, but giving them the idea that you are interested in knowing all of the specifics kind of opens the door where they need to respond. Whether they're telling you the truth or not is just another conversation. But moms, especially, have a way of finding things out. So having the conversations are so much more important now, because when we don't it's like, oh, I'm going to so and so's house, so I'm riding with so and so. I'm like, okay, who? We're so used to knowing who these kids are that they're with, and oh, I know their parent, and let me give them a call and make sure that, that kind of thing. And obviously this is something I feel like is more pertaining to girls, but in our area, the officer said that trafficking is not really a big concern here, but because of reports they get from the state police, they are alerted to when people come through our state and utilize specifically the low budget hotels to traffic. And that's scary and reassuring kind of in the same way. One, we don't really have cases here, but two, they are coming through our town, and that's sad. That's really sad.
Yeah, definitely is and scary.
Yeah.
So we asked if he had any experiences with kids in the juvenile system. So he had said DYS custody. He explained a little bit about that they don't arrest the kids. They detain them and they can be released to a parent or guardian. Or if the incident occurs multiple times, they could go into DCF custody. And then just to kind of clarify a little bit between like DCF and DYS, DCF is the Department of Children and Families, and different states sometimes call it different things. So DCF is what they use in the New England area, but other states in, South and stuff call it something else sometimes. And they focus on protecting the child and the family and keeping them safe from abuse, neglect, an unsafe home, or parents that are just not meeting the child's needs and taking care of them. Their goal is to keep the child safe, and they do ultimately want to keep kids with their families, but if necessary, they will place them into foster care. And again, try to reunite typically. And then DYS is the Department of Youth Services. So that's for youth who've been charged or convicted of a crime. And they will have sometimes court ordered custody or detention or be part of like a rehabilitation program.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're able to like decipher and explain the two, because sometimes it's like those terms, DYS, DCF, are just used so loosely, you don't realize that they are very different. And I've heard stories about kids at my son's school, oh, well, he's in DYS custody and, he hasn't been in school for a couple weeks. I'm like, so where is that? And the officer basically said that regular town law enforcement doesn't typically go to where they're being detained. They just file the reports, do the detaining, and then this department takes over. So probably because they're minors and for privacy reasons, we're not really sure where these places are located, what it looks like inside. And I really don't pay too much mind as to the stories that my child comes home with about these kids. I just don't rely on it, I guess is my point. Um, and then going back to the school, at what point do you get involved with kids at school? I feel like a lot of times when I'm br- bringing my kid into school late or picking them up for early dismissal, I always see police cruisers in front of the schools. And the answer to that is if there is actual criminal behavior happening in school. Now, all the schools, especially in our town, have school safety officers. And usually they try to staff them, one at each school, so that if there isn't a, a situation, they can act quickly to try to de escalate. And the other question we asked is, you know, he's a person, right? So what is the hardest thing about your job currently? And he strongly feels that most officers are good people and they do the job for the right reason. They're there if we need them for help. However, their job specifically gets tainted and is kind of painted with a negative brush because of things we read, and see in social media and stuff like that. And there are a lot of groups that have formed that can make it harder for police to do their job. And he basically stated that in the past 5 years that being an officer, that job has been vilified. And it makes it very hard for him as a lieutenant who oversees many officers, to keep the morale and to keep reminding them why they are actually there.
Yeah, I can see that would be really hard. So we also asked him what he thought some of the big differences were between law enforcement now and then law enforcement in the 80s, and how kids and teens grew up back then and how they grew up now. And basically, he said that now the police are highly trained and they're held more accountable than they were back in the 80s. There's definitely more scrutiny now. There's also a lack of police officers. Less people want to become police officers. And there are also higher education levels required than there was back in the 80s. Standards and training have become much higher. So it's a little bit harder to become a police officer now than maybe back in the 80s, which could be why maybe less people are doing it. And then we mentioned earlier that he's going to be becoming a dad. So we did ask him, like, based on his job, maybe not everyday life, but based on his job, what worries him the most about becoming a dad? And he said social media and cell phones. And I think I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, cell phones has just opened up a whole nother world for kids. Um, and all of the hidden apps and all that, very scary. And social media, it's like, I remember locally there was a coach that was arrested, and I remember seeing it like in a local town app on my phone or whatever, and I'm like, oh my god, like that's our coach. And thinking that kids are in school, and even though they have their cell phones, they're not on the cell phones, and it's not making national news, so they'll never find out, and we're not going to tell them about it, because how are they going to go play the game this weekend knowing that their coach was arrested? And lo and behold, the first thing that I'm being told when my kid gets off the bus is, "Oh, our coach got arrested for this." I'm like, are you sure? Like, trying to think of a way to cover that up. And yeah, both cell phones and social media. Damn, you can't keep anything from the kids right now.
I know, right?
Really?
No secrets.
No. And again, he's gonna become a dad. I believe he's having a boy. So I think it'll make it a little bit easier for him, because we know how hard it is to raise girls right now. Um, how will working in law enforcement and being a dad, like, how will that affect you, like, as your job as a dad? And he strongly feels that his experiences with public interactions has made him more weary and heightened, and has more of an awareness for what not to do, and cautions, um, is more of a wide exposure, and has seen many different type of family dynamics. Um, he is taking the best part of what he has seen on the job and is choosing to apply that when raising his own kids. And I mean, that is like the best human non-cop answer that I never expected. So it's really nice to hear that. It's not like a militant response. It's a very human, open-minded opinion that I picked up on. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think I definitely agree with them too, like being in the field of human services and working with domestic violence and sexual assault victims. I agree with, like, I feel like I also have like a heightened awareness of like certain things, maybe in a different capacity than him. And, part of my job is, working with first time parents too, and, seeing their family dynamics. And again, like, I was a parent before I did all this. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to take the best parts like him and use them, but it does kind of give you a different perspective sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like he's going to make a really decent father.
I think so too.
Yeah. So in closing, and this episode has been a little bit heavy for us, um, kind of just eye-opening a little bit, and I'm kind of glad that we're in New England, not in Texas right now. But in closing, and this has a lot to do with the topic of racism, and I did have a conversation with my son, and I call him my stepson, even though I'm not his stepmother. But my son has light skin and his best friend has dark skin. And we had a open conversation about the Carmelo case, and they both gave their honest opinions about how racism is now, and how this case carries over to how they look at race and how they look at accountability and actions of other teenagers that they surround themselves with. And then most importantly, what would they have done whether they were Carmelo or Austin in that situation? So in closing, I'm going to leave you with this. Some food for thought. Color isn't a property that exists independently in objects. It's the result of light. Your eyes, your brain working together to create the experience of color. So adjust the light around you. Put some sunglasses on, and remember, we are all just colors of the rainbow. Until next time.